The moment I saw my fiancée Emily pull out of our driveway that Saturday morning, something felt wrong. She leaned out her car window with the same warm smile I'd fallen in love with and said, "I'll be back before dinner. Mom isn't feeling well, so I'm taking her groceries and staying for lunch." It sounded normal. It should have sounded normal. But there was one tiny detail that refused to leave my mind. Her mother's house was 20 minutes east of our home, yet Emily turned her car west. I stood frozen on the porch with my coffee growing cold in my hand, telling myself I was overthinking it. We were only 6 weeks away from our wedding. We had already mailed the invitations, paid the deposits, and dreamed about our future together. Why would I doubt the woman I planned to spend the rest of my life with? I almost went back inside, until I noticed she had switched off her phone's location sharing for the very first time. For nearly an hour, I argued with myself. Every decent man knows trust is a foundation of love, and I hated the person I was becoming just by considering following her. But another voice kept reminding me of the little changes I'd ignored for months. She had started sleeping with her phone under her pillow instead of charging it on the nightstand. She laughed less around me, but smiled constantly while texting someone else. She had begun working late, even though her company had confirmed months earlier that overtime had been cut. Each change seemed harmless on its own, but together they formed a puzzle I couldn't solve. Finally, I grabbed my car keys. I wasn't chasing her to catch her cheating. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. I only wanted proof that my fears were ridiculous. Her SUV stayed 3 or 4 cars ahead of me the entire drive. I made sure never get close enough for her to notice. Yet I never lost sight of those familiar brake lights. After 25 minutes, she passed a highway exit that led directly to her mother's neighborhood without slowing down. My stomach tightened. Another 10 minutes later, she entered the parking lot of a modern office complex surrounded by cafes, luxury boutiques, and expensive restaurants. This wasn't a hospital. It wasn't a residential neighborhood. It certainly wasn't where her mother lived. Emily parked near the far corner, checked herself in the rearview mirror, fixed her hair, applied fresh lipstick, and stepped out of the car with a smile I hadn't seen in weeks. I stayed hidden behind a delivery van, wondering who could possibly be waiting for her. A black luxury sedan rolled into the lot only moments later. The driver stepped out wearing sunglasses, a navy suit, and an expensive watch that sparkled in the morning sun. He wasn't much older than me, maybe 35, athletic, confident, and carrying himself like someone who never doubted he belonged wherever he went. Emily saw him and immediately smiled. Not the polite smile she gave strangers. Not the tired smile she'd been giving me lately. It was a smile of someone genuinely excited. They walked toward each other, and before either of them spoke, he wrapped his arms around her in a long embrace. My chest tightened so hard I struggled to breathe. I wanted to believe it was a relative I had never met, or perhaps an old friend. Then she rested her head on his shoulder for several seconds, and every excuse I had prepared vanished. I reached for my phone with trembling hands and began recording from inside my car. My heart pounded so loudly it almost drowned out everything around me. The man handed Emily a small gift bag tied with a silver ribbon. She laughed, opened it immediately, and pulled out what looked like a delicate bracelet. He fastened it around her wrist while she watched him with unmistakable affection. Moments later, she leaned forward and kissed him on the cheek. It wasn't rushed or awkward. It looked comfortable, practiced, familiar. I felt something inside me crack. The wedding venue, the honeymoon tickets, the house we'd spent 2 years renovating together. Every dream we'd built flashed before my eyes, yet something still didn't fit. If they were hiding an affair, why meet in such an open place during broad daylight? Curiosity overpowered heartbreak. I left my car and quietly followed them across the parking lot, keeping enough distance to remain unnoticed. They entered a quiet coffee shop with floor-to-ceiling windows. I found a seat outside where I could hear fragments of their conversation whenever the entrance opened. At first, nothing sounded romantic. They talked about paperwork, schedules, and dates. Then I heard Emily whisper, "He still doesn't suspect anything." My blood turned cold. The man nodded and slid a thick brown envelope across the table. She looked inside, smile with relief, and carefully place it into her handbag before reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. I couldn't hear another word, but I didn't need to. Whatever they were planning it behind my back. For the next 40 minutes, I watched them laugh together like two people sharing a secret. Every now and then, Emily checked her phone, probably making sure I hadn't called. I never did. I wanted answers, not arguments. When they finally stood up, I expected them to leave separately. Instead, they walked side by side toward the parking garage connected to the complex. I hurried after them, but stayed hidden behind concrete pillars. The garage was quieter than the cafe, every footstep echoing through the empty levels. They stopped beside the black sedan again. This time there were no windows separating me from them. I clearly saw the man brush a strand of hair away from Emily's face. Then she looked around nervously before pulling him into what appeared to be a brief kiss. My knees nearly gave out beneath me. I want to confront them right there. I even took 2 steps forward before stopping myself. Anger demands immediate action, but evidence demands patience. If I exploded now, they'd deny everything. They would call me paranoid, jealous, unstable. Instead, I lifted my phone and captured every second. The embrace, the kiss, the bracelet, their faces, their license plate, every detail. Just as I lowered the camera, another voice echoed across the parking garage. "Emily!" an older woman shouted. Both Emily and the stranger turned instantly. Standing near the elevator was someone I recognized immediately. Emily's mother. But instead of looking surprised or confused, she smiled at the stranger and waved as. My heart stopped. Emily had lied about visiting her mother because her mother was already there. I remained hidden as the 3 of them began talking together. Emily's mother hugged the man warmly, laughing about something I couldn't hear. Then she reached into her purse and handed him a folder almost identical to the brown envelope Emily had received earlier. Whatever this was, it wasn't an accident. It wasn't a random meeting. Her own mother was involved. I felt physically sick. The woman who had welcomed me into their family, toasted to our future, and cried tears of joy when we announced our engagement had apparently been keeping the same secret. For several minutes they spoke seriously, occasionally glancing around the garage as though making sure nobody was watching. Then Emily suddenly stiffened. She looked directly toward the row of pillars where I was hiding. Our eyes didn't meet, but I realized with horror that she'd noticed movement. Without thinking, I ducked behind the nearest concrete column and held my breath. Footsteps echoed closer. Slow, careful, deliberate. Whoever was approaching had left the others behind. I gripped my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white, praying it wouldn't ring or vibrate. The footsteps stopped only a few feet away. Silence filled the garage. Then I heard the stranger's calm voice say, "You can come out now. We've known you were here since you left your house." Every muscle in my body froze. They hadn't just caught me following them. They had expected me to do it. And in that terrifying moment, I realized the biggest lie wasn't the one Emily had told that morning. The biggest lie was the life I thought we had been building together. The stranger's words echoed through the empty parking garage like a gunshot. "We've known you were here since you left your house." For a few seconds, I couldn't move. Every instinct told me to run, but my feet refused to obey. Slowly, I stepped out from behind a concrete pillar, my phone still recording. Emily stood several yards away with tears already forming in her eyes, while her mother looked down at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. The stranger remained perfectly calm, almost as if this meeting had been scheduled weeks in advance. I expected excuses, lies, or desperate apologies. Instead, he simply looked at me and said, "Before you decide what you think you saw today, you need to hear the entire truth." I had never hated a sentence more. I laughed bitterly. "The truth?" I asked. I just watched my fiancée hug another man, accept jewelry from him, kiss him, and lie about visiting her mother. Tell me, which part of that has another explanation? Emily took a hesitant step toward me, but I immediately backed away. The engagement ring I'd spent months saving for suddenly felt meaningless. Every wedding plan, every promise, every late-night conversation about our future disappeared in an instant. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the wedding venue contract I'd been carrying to finalize another payment that afternoon, tore it in half, and let the pieces fall onto the concrete floor. "The wedding is over," I said. "Whatever this is, I'm done." Emily broke down instantly. She wasn't pretending. Her shoulders shook as she cried harder than I had ever seen before. "Please don't leave," she whispered. "You don't understand." I looked at her with a mixture of heartbreak and anger. "You're right," I replied. "I don't understand why the woman I love stood here kissing another man while planning a wedding with me." Before she could answer, the stranger calmly opened the brown envelope she had received earlier and removed several documents. Instead of hiding them, he handed them directly to me. "Read the first page," he said. I almost refused, but curiosity won. The title at the top froze me in place. It wasn't a love letter. It wasn't a hotel reservation. It was a legal property transfer agreement, with my name listed as the sole beneficiary. Confused, I flipped through the remaining pages. There were blueprints, financial statements, bank confirmations, and contracts involving a lakeside property nearly 3 hours from the city. The estimated value exceeded $2 million. My hand started shaking again, but this time for an entirely different reason. Emily quietly wiped away her tears before speaking. 3 years ago, she said, "You told me your dream was to own a place where we could eventually raise a family away from the city. I never forgot that." She pointed toward the documents. "Everything we've been doing, every secret meeting, every lie, was supposed to end with us surprising you on our wedding day." For a brief second, I actually wanted to believe her. The documents looked authentic. The dates stretched back almost a year. There were records of deposits, architectural plans, and renovation schedules. But then I remembered the bracelet, the hugs, the kiss. "Nice story," I said coldly. "Now explain him." Emily looked toward the stranger before taking a deep breath. "His name is Daniel. He's my mother's financial advisor and my cousin." I stared at both of them in disbelief. Emily's mother finally stepped forward, opening her phone to reveal dozens of old family photographs. Daniel appeared in birthday parties, Christmas dinners, childhood vacations, and graduation pictures dating back more than 20 years. My anger weakened slightly, but only slightly. Family or not, cousins don't usually kiss each other. Daniel sighed heavily before speaking. "You're absolutely right," he admitted. "What you saw looked terrible." He reached into his wallet and removed another photograph. This one showed him standing beside a woman, wearing the exact same bracelet Emily now had on her wrist. "That woman was my wife," he said quietly. "She passed away from cancer 2 years ago. Before she died, she asked me to give this bracelet to the first bride in our family." Emily didn't know its story until today. My eyes shifted toward Emily's wrist. Suddenly the gift bag made sense. But the kiss still didn't. I folded my arms. "And the parking garage?" Emily looked embarrassed. When Daniel gave me the bracelet, I kissed his cheek because I was crying. It reminded me of his wife. You saw 1 second of a much longer conversation. She paused before adding softly, "I swear on everything I love, I never cheated on you." Her voice sounded painfully sincere. For the first time that day, doubt crept into my certainty. Had I really built an entire story from a few isolated moments? Had my own fear connected as that didn't belong together? I wanted to ask another question, but my phone vibrated before I could speak. The notification came from an unknown number. Attached was a single photograph. My stomach dropped instantly. It showed Emily, but not with Daniel. It showed her entering a downtown hotel 6 weeks earlier with a completely different man. The message underneath contained only 8 words. "Ask her about room 814 before believing anything." My heartbeat exploded. Slowly, I turned the screen toward Emily. The color drained from her face. She didn't look confused this time. She looked terrified. She whispered only one sentence. "I hoped you'd never see that." Every bit of trust one had started rebuilding collapsed again. "Who is he?" I demanded. Emily couldn't answer immediately. Tears streamed down her face as she struggled to breathe. Finally, she admitted, "His name is Ryan." Silence consumed the garage. He was my ex. My vision blurred with rage. "So you did cheat?" She shook her head violently. No, please let me explain. She told me that 6 weeks earlier Ryan had unexpectedly contacted her, claiming he possessed documents proving someone inside my business partnership had been stealing money from me for over a year. He refused to discuss it over the phone because he feared being monitored, against her better judgment. She agreed to meet him in a hotel conference room where he was attending a corporate seminar. She never told me because she wanted to verify everything before causing panic. Daniel immediately handed me another folder. Inside were financial audits, bank records, and email printouts. Every document pointed toward the same person, my business partner, Victor, someone I trusted like a brother, someone who had helped me build my company from the ground up over the previous 18 months. Victor had quietly redirected nearly $500,000 into shell companies registered under fake names. Emily had discovered enough evidence to confront him, but Victor learned she was investigating. That's when the anonymous threats began. He warned her that if she told me too early, he'd destroy the business before we could collect enough proof. Daniel, being both family and a financial expert, secretly helped him build the legal case. Even Emily's mother became involved because she knew Victor personally and could access older records. My legs felt weak as the full picture finally came together. Emily had been living a double life with another man. She had been risking everything to protect the future we were trying to build. Every lie she'd told had been connected to one impossible goal, exposing someone who planned to ruin me financially before our wedding. The anonymous message I had just received wasn't evidence of an affair. It was Victor's final attempt to destroy the trust between us before the investigation became public. He knew exactly how suspicious the hotel photograph looked because he'd arranged for someone to take it. Before any of us could say another word, tires screeched across the parking garage entrance. A dark SUV raced toward us before stopping abruptly. Victor stepped out holding his phone, clearly unaware that I was already standing beside Emily. The confident smile on his face disappeared the second he realized everyone was together. Daniel quietly looked at me and whispered, "He's here, because the documents were supposed to be delivered to your lawyer this afternoon." Victor took one step backward. "You don't understand," he stammered. But for the first time in months, he was the one who looked afraid. Within minutes, 2 unmarked police vehicles entered the garage. Officers approached Victor with arrest warrants already prepared using the evidence Daniel and Emily had spent nearly a year collecting. Victor glanced toward me one last time before lowering his head in defeat. "She chose him over me," he muttered bitterly as officers placed him in handcuffs. That single sentence answered the final unanswered question. Years earlier, Victor had secretly developed feeling for Emily. When she rejected him and stayed with me, his jealousy slowly turned into revenge. Destroying my company and my relationship had become his obsession. The following morning, I stood alone in our empty wedding venue. The cancellation paperwork rested on the reception table, exactly where I'd left it the previous day. Emily quietly walked in wearing the same clothes from the parking garage, exhausted after an entire night of giving statements to investigators. Neither of us spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, I picked up the torn contract I'd ripped apart in anger. Then I looked at the woman who had spent months protecting me while I was busy doubting her. I realized trust isn't tested when everything makes sense. It's tested when nothing does. Slowly, I reached into my pocket, removed the engagement ring she thought I'd thrown away forever, and held out once more. 6 months later, we stood beside the completed lakeside home that had nearly become the reason we lost each other forever. The wedding was smaller than originally planned, but infinitely more meaningful. There were no grand secrets left between us, no hidden investigations, no unanswered questions. Sometimes I still think about that parking garage and how close I came to walking away from the greatest relationship in my life, because I believed what my eyes saw before I learned what my heart needed to understand. I've discovered that betrayal isn't always committed by the person you love. Sometimes it's committed by the person who wants you to stop loving them. And if I had driven away that day without listening for 5 more minutes, I would have destroyed my own future with my own hands.